My husband brought me perfumes from Paris, Belgian chocolates, and an Italian leather bag women would elbow each other for in duty-free. 24 hours later, my daughter-in-law was posting selfies with my bag and calling it hers. As the story unfolds, take a moment to like, hit the hype button, subscribe, and write in the comments. Would you forgive her or walk away? I had apparently expired without being informed. I just hadn't laid down yet. I remember standing there in the middle of the living room when Charles rolled his suitcase down the hall. He grinned like a little boy with a secret. I tried not to roll my eyes because I knew that grin. It meant he had spent entirely too much money, and part of me loved him for it anyway. There was a faint scent of cologne from the plane, mixed with the sharp, clean smell of new leather. He knelt down, like he was unpacking treasure from a chest, and there it was, a small cluster of boxes and tissue paper, all arranged as though he were presenting me with the crown jewels. Perfumes with names I would never remember but could smell anyway. Belgian chocolates in a tin that looked like it belonged in a museum. A silk scarf that would never wrinkle, never fade, always soft, always perfect. And then, at the center of it all, the bag. Italian leather, deep mahogany, soft, supple, gorgeous. The kind of bag women would fight for in an airport, the kind that made you hold yourself differently just by looking at it. I wanted to roll my eyes. I wanted to sigh. I wanted to tell him, Charles, I don't need all this. I have a closet full of things I don't even wear. But instead I smiled, because deep down I knew why he did it. He didn't just buy things. He was buying me back in little doses, reminding me that he still saw me. Not as a mother, not as a widow of routine, not as a fixture in the background. He was telling me in his own clumsy, expensive way, I still see you as you. We set the table for the next day, not knowing what storm had already started brewing. I could hear Andrew and Wendy laughing on the phone, probably over some Instagram post I wouldn't know about yet. The idea of them coming over was both comforting and horrifying. Andrew was Andrew, self-assured, entitled, already believing that the house, the yard, the garden, even the air we breathed were part of his inheritance. And Wendy had perfected the sweet, condescending tone that could wound sharper than a screaming argument. I could already hear it. This kitchen is so authentic, like retro cottage vibes. People pay good money to fake this kind of old coastal look. I could almost see her sipping her coffee, holding her head slightly to the side, eyes darting over the shelves and cabinets like a museum curator, judging the accuracy of a display. Translation: Your house looks old, but I'll pretend it's charming, and I'll smile as I look down on it anyway. Dinner arrived, and with it, Andrew's logistics lecture. He had that tone perfected, calm, like he was walking me through a spreadsheet instead of discussing his mother's home. Yeah, he said, waving his fork toward the staircase. When you guys aren't up for stairs anymore, it just makes sense we move in here. I mean, it's too big for you two anyway. He said it like he was discussing square footage for a storage unit, not a home I had spent decades shaping. And there was Wendy, perched on the edge of the table, nodding sweetly like a bobblehead, her smile too tight, her eyes calculating. They were already drawing room lines in their heads, already measuring my life in furniture and wallpaper. I held my tongue. I smiled. I made the right noises. Charles, bless him, tried to intervene a couple of times, throwing me glances that said, "Say something, Liz," and then settling on a sigh when I didn't. I knew better. I was mother enough to let them think they had the upper hand for now. Let them feel the small victories. Let them believe they were subtly assigning the future without me noticing. When the dinner finally ended, I excused myself quietly. I wanted to place the gifts where they belonged. The perfumes, the chocolates, the scarf, the bag. All of it. I wanted to put it in my closet, in the place I had prepared with care the night before. I turned the knob. The closet was empty. I froze, my hand still on the knob. My heart thrummed against my chest in a way I hadn't felt since I'd raised Andrew as a toddler, and he fell hard on the hardwood floor. But this wasn't a bump or a bruise. This was different. The bag was gone. The perfume was gone. The chocolates. The silk scarf. Every single one of them. My carefully arranged little pieces of Paris, Brussels, Milan. Gone. Not borrowed, not temporarily misplaced. Gone. Someone had walked in and decided that what belonged to me was theirs. I stood there for a long time. I could hear the faint ticking of the hallway clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the floorboards settling. Nothing moved except my own breath, which caught and wheezed like it was laughing at me. And then the anger came. It wasn't the simmering irritation of an inconvenience. It wasn't the mild indignation of being overlooked. It was the sharp, clean, biting kind of anger that makes you see everyone in the room in slow motion, and it makes you start counting the ways you can set things right. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't run to Charles. I didn't even try to call Andrew or Wendy. I just closed the door, turned the knob so slowly it creaked, and leaned against it. My hands rested on the wood like I was touching the frame of a coffin. This wasn't just theft. This was erasure. They had walked into my house and taken more than things. They had walked into my life and decided that it wasn't theirs to respect, so they could violate it anyway. And yet, beneath the rage, there was a strange clarity. I could see every step they had taken. I could imagine Wendy taking the bag and the chocolates and the perfume, laughing softly, snapping pictures, posting stories to show the world what she had accomplished. I could imagine Andrew nodding along, approving, convinced he had the upper hand. And I knew, in that instant, that they had underestimated me. Completely. I slid down the door and sat on the floor. My hands clenched my knees. My mind raced through options, through logistics, through the long game. This wasn't going to be about tantrums or shouting matches. This wasn't going to be a momentary slapback. This was going to be methodical, measured, cold. They had walked into my house and taken what was mine. That was the first step, and I was about to take the next one. People have stolen time from me, sleep from me, nerve and softness from me. This was the first time someone walked into my house and stole me, and I would not let it be the last time I acted like a victim. I would not sit quietly while my life and my home were parceled out like a convenience. I was still here, still breathing, still in charge of what belonged to me, and they were about to find out, in ways they hadn't considered yet, that taking from me came with a price. I took a slow breath and stood, scanning the room, imagining where every gift from Paris, Brussels, and Milan should have been, and where I'd put them once I took them back. The anger in my chest wasn't chaos anymore. It was focus, strategy. They thought I'd roll over. They were wrong. I looked out the window, lights, dogs, the smell of wet leaves from the harbour, and pictured turning the tables completely. Not tomorrow, not someday. Soon, in ways they'd never see coming. I smiled. Not the soft smile of a mother, but the kind that means the game just changed. They'd taken my things, assuming I'd do nothing. That I didn't matter, but they were about to be proven wrong. People have stolen time and peace from me before. This was the first time someone stole me. I called my son. Andrew, I said, why is Wendy posting my handbag with the caption, European gift from my husband? He sighed like I'd asked him to solve world hunger. Mom, Wendy said she'll use it more than you, so I gave her everything. Don't make this a drama. The bag, the perfume, the chocolates, gone, handed over like loose change. I went silent, hearing my heartbeat louder than his voice. He mistook that silence for weakness. Charles, standing nearby, saw my hand tighten. He took the phone. You robbed your mother in her own house, he shouted. You walked in, took her things, and handed them off. That's theft, Andrew. Andrew stammered, trying to sound casual. It's not a big deal. She'll use it, don't overreact. Charles's jaw clenched. He looked ready to storm over, ripped the bag back himself. For a second, I almost let him. But I didn't. I put a hand on his arm. Steady, cold. No, that's what they want. They want me hysterical and you violent. We're not giving them that. Something shifted between us. He understood that the old pattern, him raging, me soothing, Andrew escaping, was over. I hung up. No calls, no texts, no tears. I sat in the silence, letting it harden into something useful. Andrew didn't see me as a person anymore, not the mother who mattered, but a vault he could empty without asking. What I felt wasn't rage, it was clarity. I didn't need to beg or fight or cry, I only needed to protect myself. Charles looked at me as if waiting for permission, like he was half expecting me to waver, to say, "Go, fix it." But I didn't. I was the one in charge of this moment and every next one after it. I let him simmer, held his gaze, and just let the silence stretch between us. I didn't need to speak. My presence alone, still and unshakable, said everything he needed to know. For the first time in my life, I didn't protect my son from consequences. I protected myself from my son. I let the anger rise, let it settle, let it find the part of me that had been quiet too long, the part that didn't flinch at entitlement and audacity and the arrogance of youth thinking it could outsmart me. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sorry. I felt the beginnings of a plan, the outlines of what I would do, how I would handle them, how I would make sure they understood that taking from me would always come at a cost they hadn't imagined. I put my hand on the couch, leaned forward, and let the weight of my body press into the cushion like a reminder to myself that I was here, that I existed, and that I would not be erased. And in that moment, I knew, truly knew, that the next time Andrew or Wendy tried to treat my life like it wasn't mine, like they had the right to rearrange it, I would be ready. I wouldn't react in panic or tears. I would act deliberately. And I let myself smile, the kind of small, cold smile that comes from someone who knows she holds the upper hand in a game the other players haven't even realized has begun. Andrew thought he was in control. He thought Wendy was clever. He thought I wouldn't notice, that I would fold quietly, that I would be the mother who smiles politely while her world is gradually dismantled. He was wrong, and they were about to find out how wrong they had been. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the mother keeping everyone safe and happy. I was Elizabeth Lowell, and I was reclaiming something they had taken without permission. The moment hung between us, quiet, electric, full of all the things I hadn't said in years, all the things I hadn't allowed myself to feel. And in that quiet, I realized something that made the corners of my mouth lift just slightly. This wasn't the end of my story. This was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where I wasn't just surviving, I was planning, I was calculating, I was going to take back everything, one step at a time, and this time I wouldn't forgive. For the first time in my life, I didn't protect my son from consequences. I protected myself from my son. And the air in the room felt different because of it, like it had been charged by electricity that wasn't going anywhere, waiting to strike when I chose. I knew, with a certainty that cut through everything else, that I was done being the victim. They had taken what they thought they could, and now it was my turn to set the rules. I was awake, I was ready, and they didn't even know the game had started. Ruth called at exactly 8:15 a.m., before my coffee had even started to drip into the pot. She didn't waste time on greetings. There wasn't a good morning or a how are you. There was just, Liz, Wendy is at the market telling people your house is basically theirs now. I sat down on the edge of the counter, holding the phone like it was a live grenade. My hands tightened around it and I felt that familiar twist in my stomach. The twist that tells you the people you raised to respect you instead think they can rewrite your life as a board game they're already winning. Ruth Avery didn't sugarcoat. She never had. She was my neighbor, my witness, my small-town radar. When she spoke, you knew it was truth, unfiltered, unshakable. "She's loud," Ruth went on, "telling anyone who'll listen that you and Charles don't need all that space anymore. She says you should downsize to something age-appropriate, and naturally, Andrew says it's practical. They're planning to move in like they own it already." I closed my eyes and let it sink in. They weren't dreaming a future. They were narrating it, claiming my life, my home, while I still lived in it. It wasn't entitlement. It was insolence. I thought of all the times I'd bailed Andrew out. Money, a car, a couch, a spare room. I'd been his safety net, the one who smoothed things over so he could keep believing he was the center of the world. And now they treated me like a backdrop to be repurposed. Anger settled into something cold and sharp. For years, my reflex was to call Charles and have him fix things with noise and force. This time, I wanted strategy, not chaos. I went downstairs to the basement. The air smelled of dust and old varnish. The metal box felt heavy in my hands, full of deeds, surveys, receipts, refinancing papers, my father's notes, boring, binding proof that the house was ours, built and paid for over decades. Every page reminded me this place was more than wood and nails. It was leverage. They had assumed my generosity meant surrender. They were wrong. I pictured Wendy smiling into her phone with my bag, Andrew nodding like he'd pulled off something clever, and the heat in my chest sharpened into intent. I didn't scream or storm back upstairs. I sat with the papers, feeling their weight. Those stamps and signatures were ammunition, not to bruise, but to shatter pride and expose illusion. The house, my history, my name, mine, and now usable. Patience and foresight had taught me something valuable. This would not be a tantrum. It would be systemic, slow, undeniable. I stacked the documents, planning which details would sting most, mapping the timeline of exposures and confrontations. For the first time in years, I felt untouchable. Not from force, but from preparation. They had thought I was passive. They'd misread me. I stood, stretched, the papers solid in my hands, and felt the shift. The law, truth, and a deliberate plan were my weapons. I could make them pay without raising my voice. I carried the metal box back upstairs slowly, deliberately. Each step was measured, each movement part of a ritual of reclamation. I set it down in the corner of my living room, within reach but out of sight, a constant reminder that the ground I stood on was solid, that the house, my life, and everything I had built could not be taken without consequence. I thought of Ruth again, her blunt words echoing in my head, her loyalty a shield, her sharpness a warning that this small town was full of ears, and she was listening. I would use that. Every conversation, every glance, every gossip whispered into the wrong ear would be part of the plan. They had underestimated me. They didn't know the depth of patience, the clarity of mind, the cold precision I could summon. They didn't know I was ready. I used to think this house was a home. I was wrong. It's a weapon, and it's sitting in my hands. And in that moment, the anger wasn't chaos anymore. It was focus. It was method. It was a promise, a blueprint, a declaration that the game had shifted. From here on, every action I took would be deliberate, every move calculated, every response proportionate, and every exposure precise. The first step had been taken. The rest would follow. Before you slit someone's throat socially, you offer them tea. People relax around warmth. They never see you measuring the softest part of their neck. I made the tea slowly, letting the steam curl up from the pot like it was smoke in a detective movie, just soft enough to make the room feel normal, ordinary. I didn't rush, and I didn't slam cups down. Calmness is part of the weaponry. It makes people let their guard down. It makes them think they're walking into comfort. Then you can see everything. You see the greed in the smile, the hesitation in the hand, the little twitch when they lie. I called Andrew and Wendy over for what I framed as a peace talk. I kept my tone soft, even a little weary. The kind of tone that says, I don't want conflict. Let's calm down. We can sort this like adults. In my mind, though, this was anything but peaceful. It was a calculated setup, a stage where the truth would come out at exactly the right moment. Of course, Wendy showed up carrying my bag. I almost laughed. She wore it like a badge of honor, and I knew exactly what she was doing. She draped it over the back of a kitchen chair, as though she had every right to be there, as though this was her table, her life, her territory. It wasn't subtle, it was deliberate, and it was exactly what I expected. I smiled at her, soft and easy, letting my voice trail like a lazy river. Oh, honey, I said, did you list that old dresser of mine somewhere? I was worried because the leg is weak, and I didn't want you to get blamed if it broke on a buyer. My words were soft, but they were measuring her. Every twitch of her face, every micro-expression, I catalogued like evidence in my mind. Wendy leaned forward, unconsciously pleased at the attention, and started to brag. Oh, I already sold a few things online, she said, as if she had just solved world hunger. They were just sitting there doing nothing, and honestly, we need to start curating our aesthetic. She smiled as she said it, oblivious to how much she had just revealed. Every brag was a confession, every syllable a proof. Andrew sat back, smug, clearly enjoying the show, nodding as if all of this was totally normal. Nothing to see here, just family business. He thought he was untouchable, that he could watch his wife parade off my belongings, sell my antiques, and I would smile and nod like a kindly old matron. He didn't know I was no longer that matron. Then, as if the universe wanted to make it perfect, Ruth knocked on the door. She had the timing down to the minute. She came in, just casual, asking to borrow sugar, and sat at the kitchen counter like she belonged there. Ruth never wasted words, and she never took sides for appearance. She listened. She took in every word, every confession Wendy made, every smug look Andrew threw my way. Ruth catalogued it, and I knew she would remember, because she always did. I kept my voice soft, my hands moving slowly as I poured more tea into the cup I had set in front of Wendy. You're doing a lot of curating, dear. I hope it's going well for you. I know how challenging it can be to make old pieces into something fresh and relevant. Good for you for taking initiative. My voice was warm, encouraging, and completely poisonous in its intent. She believed she had won a measure of my approval, and she didn't even realize that she was laying her cards bare. Every word she said was evidence. Every casual admission was recorded in my memory, mentally tagged and time-stamped. I wasn't writing this down physically. I didn't need to. Ruth was my living recorder. She would hold on to every detail, repeat it if needed, and witness the slow collapse of their assumed power. I asked harmless questions, innocuous, almost maternal. Questions that sounded like concern, but were designed to tease out more truth. Oh, and that lamp in the living room, the one on the side table. Have you been moving that too? Just curious because it's fragile, and I'd hate for someone to be blamed for a broken shade. Wendy's response was predictably careless, casually admitting she had moved a few things, sold a few, and reassigned some to other rooms. She practically bragged about it, thinking she was charming, thinking she was clever. Andrew chuckled under his breath, as if this were a sitcom, like we were all playing parts in a comedy he had already rehearsed. The truth was sharper than any joke, but he couldn't see it, and that was fine. They couldn't see it yet, not until I was ready. The tea cooled on the counter. The sunlight came through the window at just the right angle, lighting up the edges of the bag she had stolen from me, highlighting its color, its quality, its perfectness. She didn't notice the glare bouncing off the leather, and I didn't correct her. Let her glory in it. Let her believe it belonged to her. Let her smile thinking she had won something. Everything she was proud of, I would use later. Everything she revealed in that room would tighten the net I was weaving around them. I listened, nodded, poured, asked questions, smiled. Soft, harmless, maternal. I made the conversation feel ordinary, gentle, reasonable. And all the while, I was weighing, judging, planning. Every word she said became part of the ledger, every action a tally of evidence against her. They had assumed I was naive, indulgent, powerless. They were wrong. I had seen everything. I had catalogued everything. Wendy finished her little exhibition, picked up her bag, and started toward the door. Andrew followed, still wearing his smug grin. They believed the meeting was over, that they had escaped unscathed, that they had behaved charmingly enough to avoid consequences. They didn't know that in their own admissions, in their own boasting, they had sealed their fate. Once the door closed, I let myself exhale, the tension draining out like steam from a kettle. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea, savoring the quiet. Ruth sat there silently, watching, waiting. I looked at her and said, "You want me to repeat what Wendy just said? I can repeat every word in front of God and town hall if you want." Ruth's eyes sparkled, sharp and knowing. "Oh, I can. I've got it all. Every word, every boast, every little brag." I nodded slowly, taking a sip from my cup, letting the warmth fill me. I didn't tremble. I didn't flinch. "Good," I said. "I don't just have a feeling anymore. I have her voice." And just like that, the net tightened. The proof was out there. The story, once told casually over coffee and gossip, was now documented in memory, witness, and evidence. They had spoken freely, believing they were clever, that their audacity would go unchallenged. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated the power of a mother who had been quiet too long, who had catalogued every slight, every theft, every insult, every casual dismissal. They didn't know it yet, but the tide was turning. I set my cup down with deliberate care, the sound ringing faintly against the kitchen tiles. The room was quiet, the evidence contained not in words written down, but in the undeniable fact that I had heard everything, seen everything, and remembered everything. Wendy had confessed. Andrew had watched it unfold. Ruth had witnessed it, and I had finally realized that their arrogance had handed me everything I needed. For the first time, I felt the power settle fully on my shoulders, not as a weight, but as a tool. The morning sun illuminated the kitchen, glinting off the edges of the table, the shiny surface of the stolen bag, and the cup in my hand. I let it all sit in my vision, the clarity sinking into me. I was no longer the mother who forgave because she loved. I was Elizabeth Lowell, aware, precise, and calculating. And now, armed with truth, witness, and a calm that hid a storm, I could begin. The game had changed. The stakes were clear. I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was responding strategically. Every brag, every casual admission from Wendy, every smirk from Andrew had been a gift to me, a set of tools to dismantle their imagined dominance. The chessboard was set, and I had the first move in mind, waiting for the right time to strike. Good. I didn't just have a feeling anymore. I had her voice. That voice would be a weapon, a record, and a warning. And they didn't even know it yet. People love to tell you, family is sacred. No. Paper is sacred. Paper with a signature. Family is whoever thinks they can use that paper to justify stepping all over you. I learned early that signatures carry weight, that a single notarized page can make the difference between being ignored and being feared. And now I was ready to wield that kind of weight. I drove to the office of a small-town estate attorney I had known for years. He wasn't some cinematic, overpaid lawyer from Manhattan who made deals over whiskey and cigars. He was a man who had spent decades writing wills, transferring property, documenting ownership, and untangling family dramas in a town so small everyone knew everyone's business anyway. His office smelled of coffee, old paper, and a faint trace of the ocean breeze, that always blew in through the cracked window near the filing cabinets. I liked it there because it was real. Nothing flashy, nothing fake, just truth bound by law. I explained the situation to him calmly, without dramatics. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't complain, I didn't beg. I simply laid out the facts. My son Andrew and his wife Wendy had taken my belongings, treated my home as if it were theirs, and were now broadcasting it publicly, using it as leverage, flaunting it, laughing while thinking they had won. I didn't need pity. I needed authority. He nodded. He understood immediately. He had seen this 100 times in smaller forms. Families where entitlement overpowered reason, where adult children believed the world owed them more than they'd earned. He asked me questions about the house, about Charles, about how I wanted the trust structured, about the contingencies for anyone who tried to override it. I answered everyone with clarity. My voice was steady. My hands rested on the desk. I wasn't asking for permission. I was asserting control. We began drafting the revocable living trust. I made sure the language was exact, precise, airtight. Charles and I would be trustees. That meant the house was under our control, legally, officially. No one could move in. No one could use it as collateral. No one could touch it without both of our consent. I could almost hear Andrew's smug face cracking in my mind, imagining his outrage when he realized the house wasn't automatically his. I let myself savor it. Every clause was deliberate. Every line of the trust was designed to prevent Andrew from assuming he could operate in my home as if it were his own. This was not about vengeance through drama. This was about leverage, about law, about authority. I wasn't going to drag him to court. I wasn't going to have to call the police for trespassing. I didn't need to throw him in jail. I didn't need to scream, to fight, to cry. I just needed to close the doors he thought were open and lock them in plain sight. I watched as the attorney notarized the papers, stamping each copy, sealing each page. Each stamp felt like a declaration. Each signature was a nail in the coffin of Andrew's imagined entitlement. The documents were thick with legal jargon, clauses, and contingencies that would frustrate even the cleverest schemer. But that was the point. They weren't clever. They were arrogant. They assumed my patience and indulgence meant ignorance. They assumed my compliance meant weakness. They assumed I would let them walk through my life unchecked. I could feel the satisfaction settling into my chest as the documents were finalized. The trust was real. The house was mine. Legally, morally, undeniably mine. And now, Andrew and Wendy couldn't take it without challenge. Even if they tried, every move would be visible, every assumption exposed. They had miscalculated, and they didn't even know it yet. I collected the copies, neatly stacked and sealed in an envelope. I held it under my arm like a sword, feeling the weight of it, feeling the control it represented. The envelope wasn't just paper, it was authority. It was the tangible manifestation of everything I had learned about patience, foresight, and holding the line. The air in the office felt lighter as I left, the scent of old paper and ink trailing behind me like a trail of smoke. Outside, I stood on Main Street, the envelope snug under my arm. The sun was just climbing higher, casting light across the small town that had always thought they knew the story of my family. They didn't. Not yet. I looked around at the familiar streets, the familiar neighbors tending gardens, walking dogs, grabbing coffee, unaware that the balance of power in my family had just shifted. The envelope under my arm was a silent statement. The house was mine, the control was mine, and the game had changed. I could almost picture Andrew walking past a window, thinking he might waltz in, expecting the doors to be open, expecting his mother to be the soft, forgiving presence he had always relied on. I smiled at the thought. He didn't know that those doors were closed now, legally, formally, and irrevocably under my hand. He didn't know that what he had considered his was no longer his, not even close. I walked slowly down the street, letting the sun warm my back, feeling the envelope under my arm. It was heavy with promise, heavy with consequence, heavy with the quiet satisfaction of someone who finally understood the weight of documentation and truth. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to wave signs or threaten. The law spoke for me, and it was deafening in its clarity. They wanted my house like people want a no-limit card. I hope they like declined transactions. I let myself savor that thought as I walked, each step measured, each breath slow, deliberate, like drawing in energy for the next move. This was the midpoint. The legal foundation had been laid. I was no longer vulnerable in the ways that mattered most. I had the house, the documents, the law, and the clarity of mind to use them strategically. The next steps would be about Andrew's status, about his pride, about exposing him publicly in a way he hadn't anticipated. Charles would be with me every step of the way. He understood the importance of procedure, of patience, of letting the law and social consequences do the work. We didn't need force. We didn't need shouting. We didn't need drama to win. This wasn't about immediate satisfaction. This was about inevitability, and the inevitability was mine. I slipped the envelope under my arm again, feeling its weight, feeling the authority it carried. The air smelled faintly of salt from the harbour, crisp and sharp, reminding me of the years I had spent building this life, defending it, making sure it would endure. And now it would endure not just because I had invested in it, but because I had finally taken control, finally taken my power back, finally shown that family entitlement, arrogance, and casual theft were no match for patience, planning, and proof. The town bustled around me, indifferent to the quiet shift in my life. No one noticed the envelope tucked under my arm. No one noticed the small, controlled smile on my face as I walked past shops and cafes and neighbours tending their yards. The legal foundation was in place, and the net was tightening. Andrew and Wendy had made mistakes. They had shown their hands. They had underestimated me, and they didn't know it yet. I could hear their smug confidence in my mind, imagine their discussions of how clever they were, how entitled, how inevitable their success seemed. I let the image sit there. It fueled me. It sharpened me. Every misstep they had made was a potential trap. Every boast a weapon I could use. Every assumption about my compliance, a blind spot they hadn't accounted for. This was the moment when the scales tipped. The house wasn't just a home anymore. It wasn't just walls and rooms and a roof. It was leverage. It was authority. It was proof that I could control what belonged to me, no matter how much they assumed otherwise. And as I walked down Main Street, sun warming my back, envelope firm under my arm, I felt it settle deep in my chest. I was no longer just a mother. I was Elizabeth Lowell, holding her own, fully aware, fully in charge, and entirely ready. They wanted my house like people want a no-limit card. I hope they like declined transactions. That thought made me smirk, small and deliberate, the kind of smile that doesn't let anyone see the teeth but carries all the weight of warning. The game had changed, the foundation was set, and now it was time to start playing it. I knew he'd come banging. Men like my son always come banging when a woman signs something important without clearing it with them first. In a town this small, secrets don't stay buried, especially not when you walk into a lawyer's office that shares a wall with a coffee shop. Someone always knows someone who's married to someone who saw someone walk in. I could feel it coming even before I heard the sound of his car outside, before the slam of the door, before the heavy steps up my porch. He didn't knock. Of course he didn't. He just let himself in, like always, like it was still his home. The door creaked open, and there he was, my son, taller than me, angrier than me, but smaller in every way that mattered. His eyes were already lit with that ugly self-righteous fire. "What did you sign?" he demanded before I even said hello. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, waiting for the noise to settle. "Mom, what did you sign?" he said again, louder this time. Why are you doing this? He moved closer, his voice rising, trying to fill the space the way he always had, trying to dominate the room. You're being selfish, he said. You're making me look unreliable. That line hit like static in the air. Making him look unreliable. That was the real crime, wasn't it? Not the theft, not the betrayal, but embarrassing him, making him look bad. He started pacing the living room, muttering about how unbelievable I was, about how I never think about anyone else. The house, my house, echoed with his voice, and for the first time I realized it sounded foreign. He didn't belong here anymore. He was a guest who had overstayed, and he still hadn't noticed the eviction notice written in my eyes. I stayed still, watching him unravel. He turned back toward me, pointing like a teacher scolding a child. Be realistic, Mum, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You're not going to be in that big house forever. He said it casually, like he was talking about the weather. Like I was already fading furniture, some dusty armchair waiting to be hauled to the curb. I felt the air go thin, the kind of thin that happens right before a storm breaks. He didn't realize he'd said the wrong thing, that he'd pushed the wrong button. He thought he was asserting dominance. He didn't know he'd just lit the fuse. He stepped closer, closing the distance between us, standing too close, the air between us tight and charged. I could smell his aftershave, that overconfident cologne he wore when he needed to feel powerful. His hand brushed past me toward the counter, and he picked up the keys I'd set there. These are mine now, he said, like it was some casual fact of life. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I didn't tell him to put them down. I just looked at him until the silence got heavy enough to make him twitch. Then, slowly, I spoke. You do not enter my home uninvited again. My voice was low, steady, quiet enough that he had to lean in to hear it. That was the last time. He blinked, confused by how calm I sounded. He wasn't used to my voice when it wasn't pleading or apologizing or cushioning his ego. He wasn't used to quiet from me unless it meant defeat. This wasn't defeat. This was control. I took a step closer, closing the distance he had tried to create, meeting his eyes until he couldn't quite hold the gaze. If you ever again present what is mine as if it's yours, I said, the words deliberate, sharp, measured, I will make it public. You will be the grown man who robs his mother. Can you live with that title? Because I promise you, this town will. He blinked again, his mouth opening just slightly, like he was about to say something clever, but nothing came out. He tried to laugh, the sound awkward, brittle, cracking in the middle. You're being dramatic, he muttered, but it didn't land right. The words slid off the air and fell flat between us. I didn't respond, I just looked at him, and for the first time, I saw what was really there. Not power, not confidence, not control. Just noise, just volume pretending to be strength. He backed up a step, still trying to recover, to pull his face back together into that smug expression he wore like armor. But it didn't fit him anymore. He looked smaller somehow, as if the walls of the house had shifted and he didn't quite know how to stand inside it anymore. You can't talk to me like that, he said finally, his voice lower now, more defensive than angry. I'm your son. I let that hang there. I didn't remind him that sons don't steal from their mothers. I didn't remind him that respect is earned, not inherited. I didn't remind him that I had spent a lifetime cushioning his failures and calling it love. I just watched him, and I think that was worse for him than any argument could have been. He turned toward the door, hesitated for half a second, then dropped the keys back on the counter. Fine, he said, forcing a weak laugh. Whatever this is, you'll regret it later. He left the door open behind him, as if he couldn't quite admit that it wasn't his to close anymore. I stood there in the quiet, listening to the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway, the engine fading into the distance. My hands were steady. My heart was steady. I wasn't shaking. Not this time. That part of me, the part that flinched at raised voices, that rushed to smooth things over, that mistook silence for peace, was gone, burned clean away. He'd shown me what he was, and I'd shown him what I'd become. When I finally turned away from the door, the house felt different, not smaller, not emptier, but stronger somehow, like it had absorbed my resolve and settled into it. The papers from the lawyer sat on the side table, still sealed in their envelope, and I reached out and touched them, the texture of the paper grounding me. He thought he could intimidate me into surrender. He thought fear would keep me quiet, but fear had stopped working a long time ago. Now there was only clarity, cold, perfect, deliberate clarity. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing in his shadow. I wasn't the caretaker or the protector or the one holding the family together. I wasn't the mother who apologized for existing. I was the woman who had built this life, this home, this foundation, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that from me again. When Charles came home later, he saw it immediately. The change in the air, the absence of fear. He asked, "Did he come by?" I nodded. "Did he try anything?" I smiled, small and deliberate. "He tried," I said. "He failed." Charles didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. He saw it in my posture, in the way I stood, in the quiet that wasn't resignation anymore. It was control. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the last light of day fade from the sky. The street was quiet. The house behind me was steady. I could still hear the echo of Andrew's voice in the air, the sound of his footsteps, the arrogance in his words. But it didn't sting anymore. It just reminded me of how much he'd underestimated me. For the first time, he was the one who looked uncertain, the one who looked small, the one who realized too late that his mother wasn't afraid of hurting his feelings anymore. That part of me was gone for good. I told them we needed to sit down as adults and talk calmly. They believed me. Thieves always think they're victims. That's what made it so perfect. I sent the invitations the night before, phrased with careful civility, a family dinner to clear the air, a discussion to resolve misunderstandings. I didn't say what was coming, and of course, Andrew and Wendy didn't ask. They assumed it would be a gentle meeting, the kind where I pretended to be accommodating, where they left with smug smiles and whatever they'd already taken quietly reinforced as theirs. Charles was on board, though I didn't tell him exactly how. He trusted me, and at this point, that was enough. Ruth accidentally stopped by, claiming she needed to borrow some sugar, though everyone in town knew Ruth's timing was never an accident. She was my secret witness, my unshakable backup. The TV in the living room was hooked up to my laptop, silent and unassuming, ready to display the proof that would undo Andrew and Wendy without me raising my voice, without a single shout. When they arrived, they were relaxed, confident, carrying the usual airs of entitlement. Wendy had my bag again, naturally, draped over her shoulder like a badge of victory. She didn't notice the small, deliberate glance I cast at it, the way my hand lingered over the edge of my chair. Every detail counted, every gesture noted. I didn't greet them with anger. I smiled. Soft, calm. Warm enough to invite, not so warm it seemed false. We all sat down. I made sure the table looked ordinary. Dinner was laid out. The dishes simple, nothing fancy, nothing flashy. Everything else would be the show. I began the presentation with a quiet voice, calm, almost casual, like discussing quarterly sales at a company meeting. Slide 1 appeared, Wendy posting the stolen Italian bag, captioning it as if it were hers, smiling, posing, claiming credit. She froze slightly, caught mid-smile, realizing I wasn't smiling at her, I was showing evidence. Slide 2, screenshots of Wendy's online listings for my antique pieces, presented as her own vintage coastal finds. Every piece I had lovingly maintained, polished and treasured, sold or offered as if it had never belonged to me. Her smug confidence faltered. Her eyes darted around the room. Andrew shifted uneasily, realizing this wasn't just casual chatter anymore. Slide 3. Text messages where Wendy bragged to a friend, calling me old and suggesting I wouldn't miss it, telling anyone who would listen that the house was basically ours when she downsizes. The smugness on their faces began to crack. This was more than evidence. It was self-incrimination, undeniable proof that their sense of entitlement was both public and verifiable. Slide 4. Key excerpts from the Living Trust. Charles and I named as trustees. No one else allowed to touch the house. Andrew's imagined control, gone. Legally, unequivocally, inescapably gone. His expression shifted from confident to stunned. Wendy's lips parted as she tried to formulate a response. Every syllable she attempted to speak was swallowed by the weight of the evidence. The room grew tense. Wendy sputtered, attempting to accuse me of spying, of somehow sneaking into private communications. Her voice trembled with both anger and fear, and I let it hang in the air like smoke from a candle. The more she struggled, the more obvious her guilt became. Andrew blew up then, his voice cracking with a mix of panic and self-righteous fury. "You're ruining my life," he shouted. But his words sounded hollow, like they were echoing in someone else's house. Charles sat quietly, watching. I could feel him choosing sides, his eyes flicking between his son and me. He didn't speak, but his body language made it clear whose side he was on. And it wasn't Andrew's. That silent endorsement added a weight to the room, a subtle but unmistakable shift in power. Ruth watched everything, her sharp eyes drinking in every detail, every confession, every crack in their composure. Ruth witnessing meant the town would know by morning. That small, quiet fact added a layer of pressure Andrew and Wendy hadn't anticipated. Their public image, so carefully curated, was already fraying. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I didn't attempt to dramatize or over-explain. I presented fact after fact, proof after proof, letting their own actions speak against them. They were hysterical. They were trying to talk over me, justify themselves, salvage what little dignity they had left. But it was too late. Every word they spoke, every gesture, only dug the hole deeper. I watched them, calm and deliberate. Every bit of outrage, every sputtering denial, every defensive glance, confirmed the success of the plan. I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to threaten. I didn't have to lose my temper to win. They were destroying themselves in real time, under the quiet, steady pressure of truth. When the last slide vanished, the room went silent except for the hum of the TV. I sat back, calm, sipping my water. The proof was there, the power mine. Andrew's eyes flicked between me, Charles, and the screen. Wendy's smile cracked. Their arrogance had met its limit. I didn't raise my voice. They were the ones shouting. That's how you win, when guilt makes them loud and you stay still. Charles's hand rested on my shoulder, quiet confirmation. Ruth's nod in the corner sealed it. She'd seen everything, and in this town, that meant everyone soon would. I let them leave with the illusion of control, knowing the net was already around them. I poured another glass of water and let the calm settle. They had undone themselves. I hadn't shouted once. The satisfaction was steady, quiet. Showtime had gone exactly as planned. The next night, a storm rolled in off the water. I knew he'd come back. Narcissists always do when they lose the audience. Word of the dinner spread fast. Gossip moving through town like tidewater. Andrew's reliable provider image cracked. Wendy's luxury wife turned to the girl who stole from her mother-in-law. I didn't have to say a word. The story was writing itself. Then headlights cut through the rain. Andrew's car slid into the driveway. Too fast, too desperate. He stormed in without knocking, rain dripping from his jacket. "You're going to tell people you misunderstood," he snapped. "You'll say you're tired, confused." He was threatening to call me senile if I didn't retract the truth. He followed me down the hall, blocking the exit, shoulders squared. He didn't hit me. He didn't have to. The pressure in the air was enough. I moved toward the kitchen, calm, keeping the counter between us. Let him think he was cornering me. In reality, he was walking straight into my setup. Ruth had already called the police, asking them to swing by. The patrol car arrived just as his rant peaked, blue and red lights flashing through the rain. The officers didn't cuff him. They just looked, and in this town that was enough, seeing a grown man cornering his mother after being told to stay away. That's reputational napalm. Andrew froze. His voice stumbled. The uniforms, the quiet authority, the shift in power, it all drained him. I stood there, calm, deliberate, letting him feel the weight of the room, the fact that he was visible, accountable, and utterly exposed. I looked him in the eye, my voice low but steady. "You are no longer my protector," I said. "You are a threat, and that is now on record." The words landed like a hammer. Andrew's posture faltered. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He tried to spit out a rebuttal, but it was weak, hollow, ineffective. For the first time, the invincible, entitled son had no foothold. His power, his assumed superiority, had crumbled in the presence of calm authority, law, and strategy. I watched him finally turn and leave, shoulders tight, chest rising and falling, trying to reclaim some sense of dignity that had already slipped through his fingers. The town rumor mill would churn overnight. By morning, he would no longer be the successful son taking care of Mum. He would be the guy cops had to go calm down at his mother's house, and that was fatal to his local credibility. I didn't flinch. I didn't shake. I let the storm outside mirror the storm in the room, lightning, wind, rain, while I remained steady, unbroken, composed. The evidence of my power wasn't in shouts or confrontation. It was in the undeniable fact that Andrew had walked out, humiliated and shaken, with the witnesses, the law, and the night itself having recorded the truth. I poured myself a cup of tea afterward, sitting at the kitchen counter, the warmth running through my hands and into my chest. The storm pounded against the roof, the windows, the rain beating in sheets against the siding, and it felt like nature itself was marking the shift. I had shifted it. The balance had changed. Charles came in quietly, eyes narrowing as he saw the empty hallway, the abandoned chaos, the tension lingering in the air. "Did it work?" he asked softly. I nodded. "It did," I said. "And now the town will see exactly what they are. And that includes Andrew." Ruth gave me a small, satisfied smile, leaning against the counter. "They don't know what's coming," she said. Her voice was quiet, but full of certainty. And she was right. They had no idea that the storm outside wasn't just weather. It was a symbol, a harbinger. They didn't know I wasn't afraid anymore. They didn't know that I had anticipated every possible move. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the night stretch out around me, the storm beating its rhythm on the roof. My mind was clear, precise, ready. Andrew had tried to intimidate me, to force me to retreat, to smear me as unreliable. He had failed. Wendy had tried to maintain control through her borrowed glamour and stolen property. She had failed. The evidence, the witnesses, the law, all of it had worked. This was more than a victory. It was a statement, and the storm outside, wild and relentless, matched the storm I had unleashed inside. I looked at Charles and Ruth, letting the quiet tension linger for a moment longer. The balance had shifted. Control had returned to its rightful place. And Andrew, no matter how loud or desperate, had no claim on my authority, my home, or my life. He had been publicly, irreversibly diminished, and I had delivered it with calm, measured precision. The storm raged on, but inside, the air was steady. The power in the room was mine. The message had been sent. The record had been made. And for the first time in years, I felt completely untouchable, fully aware, fully in control. They wanted my house like other people want a black card. Fine. I didn't go to the police with this. I went somewhere that would actually hurt him, his work. The small-town business mixer was exactly the kind of place Andrew thrived in. The room buzzed with conversations about contracts, deliveries, trust, and reliability. People shaking hands, taking notes, laughing at jokes only half funny. Everyone there needed to believe he was the man with assets, the man who could be trusted with money, with responsibility, with your bottom line. That was his stage. And Wendy had come too, of course. She walked in like she belonged, polished and curated, hair perfect, dress precise, smile rehearsed. She believed if she looked flawless, if she projected perfect charm, people would overlook the reality. People would see only what she wanted them to see. I walked in behind them, calm, composed. Not apologetic, not begging, not trying to smooth over mistakes. I was wearing something clean, firm, unapologetic. I carried the bag, the Italian bag, the one she had been flaunting, stolen and claimed as hers. It swung lightly in my hand, heavy with intention, and I could see her noticing, and the little panic flicker in her eyes, almost imperceptible but real. I didn't say a word. I didn't rush. I didn't yell. I didn't even glance at Andrew. I walked past him like he wasn't there, directly to Wendy, whose smile faltered mid-air. She turned her head, caught between composure and fear. I didn't yank the bag. I didn't scream. I simply reached out and lifted it off her shoulder. My fingers closed around it and the weight settled in my hand. It was mine. Everyone there saw it happen. She didn't protest beyond a small, flustered gasp, but the humiliation had already landed. The room's attention shifted, just slightly, and that was enough. Then I set the bag down on the table between Andrew and the people who mattered for his image. The ones who wrote checks, approved contracts, decided whether he was trustworthy or not. The ones who, until now, had assumed he was stable and reliable. I opened my briefcase and laid down the papers I had printed. First, the trust documents. The Lowell House is held in trust under Elizabeth Lowell and Charles Lowell. No other party has claim or authority. I placed them carefully, deliberately. The pages were crisp, formal, undeniable. Next, screenshots. Wendy selling my antiques online, bragging to friends that she had repurposed my belongings for her aesthetic. Screenshots of her selfies with my bag, claiming it as a gift she had received. Evidence of the casual entitlement Andrew had displayed, presenting my home as if it were his guaranteed asset, implying he could leverage it any way he chose. I didn't need to raise my voice. The documents spoke for themselves. The screenshots, the printouts, the evidence. It was all there. Visible, clear, undeniable. The murmurs started immediately. People leaned forward, whispered to neighbors, scanned the evidence. I felt their eyes, the quiet shock and disbelief. Andrew's face turned a shade redder, his smile faltering, the cool composure he had practiced for years cracking under the weight of public verification. Wendy's face went pale. The smile she had worn like armor dissolved. She tried to reach for the bag, trying to reclaim a tiny shred of control, but I leaned slightly, just enough to keep her out of reach. I didn't say a word. She didn't yell. She didn't do anything but register the reality that she had been caught, fully, in front of the only audience that mattered to Andrew. Andrew tried to grab the folder, his fingers brushing the edge, desperate to stop the story from unfolding. He opened his mouth, trying to speak, to explain, to redirect. But it was too late. I was calm, composed, unflinching, every movement deliberate. He could not intimidate me, not here, not now, not in front of the audience that truly mattered. The room went silent, silence heavier than any shout, silence that carried the weight of truth, legality, and moral authority. Every eye in the room was on Andrew and Wendy, and for the first time, they couldn't rely on charm, on charisma, on image alone. They were exposed, they were accountable. I stepped back just enough to make it clear I controlled the space. My posture was relaxed, almost casual, but every inch of me radiated certainty. I didn't need to shout, I didn't need to threaten, I didn't need to justify. The papers were proof, the screenshots were proof. The narrative, once whispered behind closed doors, was now public and undeniable. I looked at Andrew, calm, deliberate, voice low and steady. "I didn't come here to ask anyone to punish you," I said, letting each word sink in. "I came here to take back my name, in front of the only audience you respect." He froze, fingers brushing the edge of the folder. His chest rose and fell rapidly. Wendy blinked repeatedly, the weight of exposure settling over her like a wet coat. I didn't move closer. I didn't raise my voice. I just held my position, a quiet sentinel, letting the truth speak. The room shifted. Andrew's confident stance had crumbled. Wendy's carefully constructed persona was unraveling in public. The murmurs spread from one table to the next. People leaned in, whispered to each other, scanned the documents again. Every glance Andrew had relied on, every nod of approval he had expected, evaporated in front of him. He opened his mouth again, trying to salvage something, anything. "Mum, this isn't fair," he said, voice higher, a little desperate. But no one was listening for him anymore. I could see it in their eyes. The authority had shifted. The power was mine. I stepped slightly out of reach, letting the papers rest between him and the observers. I could feel the tension coiling around him, the same tension I had felt when he first tried to corner me at home. Except now, it was amplified. Every move he made was witnessed. Every falter, every hesitation, every flinch, documented by eyes sharper than any courtroom. Wendy reached again for the bag, slower this time, almost pleading. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. She realized that it was over, that the theft, the lies, the pretense of entitlement, all of it had been dismantled. The evidence was on the table. The law was on my side. The audience was watching. I let a faint, controlled smile cross my face. Not smug, not cruel, just precise, just deliberate. Just enough to let them know that I had orchestrated this, that I had prepared, that every detail, every document, every screenshot had been laid out with intention. Andrew's hand hovered above the papers. His eyes darted between the documents, the audience, and me. He was desperate. He had no argument. He had no witnesses. He had no stage to stand on that could undo what was right in front of him. The room stayed silent, filled with the subtle hum of realization. People were digesting the scene, noting the evidence, noting Andrew's faltering confidence, Wendy's collapse, the calm authority of their mother. And in that silence, I could feel the shift in the air. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to throw accusations. I didn't need to dramatize. I just let the room bear witness to what was true. And the truth was mine. My house, my belongings, my reputation, my voice. I had reclaimed everything that Andrew and Wendy had assumed was theirs. And as they stood there, frozen and exposed, I let myself enjoy the satisfaction of the moment. The audience was watching. The only audience that mattered to Andrew, the only one whose opinion he had cared about, had seen the reality. And there was nothing he could do to change it. I had my name back, my home back, my authority restored, and I didn't even have to raise my voice to prove it. This isn't a little family misunderstanding. This is a grown man and his wife trying to take my life while I'm still breathing, sell off the pieces and call it logical. I could feel the weight of the room pressing in, the faint hum of conversations I didn't need to hear, and the quiet, tense anticipation of people who had no idea they were about to witness the undoing of entitlement in real time. Andrew, Wendy, the business contacts, Ruth and I sat there like a still photograph, the kind that holds a storm in pause. Everyone was waiting, but I didn't hurry. I never hurry when I have the final word. Rush undermines authority, and I had authority here, now, fully earned, fully visible. I spoke slowly, deliberately, clearly. not screaming, not crying, not pleading, just stating fact, stating truth. They took my belongings out of my home and called them theirs, I said. The words were clean and cutting, slicing through the tension like a knife, precise and undeniable. They posed online with my property to look rich. Every eye in the room shifted toward Andrew and Wendy. A faint flush spread across Andrew's face. Wendy's mouth opened and closed, trying to form a defense, but nothing came out. They told people my house was about to become theirs because I'm at that age, I continued, letting each word land, weighted with the accumulated history of their entitlement and lies. He promised my house like it was his collateral. I let a pause stretch, just long enough for the silence to grow heavy, for every person in that room to feel the truth settle in their minds. The house is mine and Charles's, held in trust. Andrew has zero right, zero, now or ever, to claim it. I am not confused. I am not senile. I am not tired. I am precise. I am deliberate. I am aware. Every eye turned to Andrew. Every jaw tightened. Every hand fell slightly limp. His smug certainty had evaporated under the weight of fact, legality, and moral clarity. Wendy had no script left. Her polished smile had faltered into a small, tense line. Ruth sat quietly, arms folded, witness to everything, ready to attest to the full, unvarnished truth. I took a step forward, measured, deliberate. I looked Andrew in the eyes, the only eyes in the room that needed to truly understand, and I said it, slow, firm, absolute. Listen carefully, because I'm only saying this once. You do not speak for me anymore. You do not use my house, my name, or my life as your sales pitch. You do not take what's mine and call it ours. You don't touch me. You don't walk into my home. You are not my safety net. You are not my future. You are not my son anymore. You are just a man I will never let through my door again. I watched as the reflexive move happened. Andrew reached for my arm, his hand stretching toward my shoulder, looking for leverage, looking for the familiar dominance he had always relied on, looking for a way to drag me back into quiet compliance. But there was nothing to grab. Nothing. I stepped back deliberately, keeping myself out of reach, every movement calm, controlled, unshakable. The room held its breath. Andrew's hand hovered in space, frozen, his confidence shattered, his grip on authority evaporated. Wendy stayed frozen as well, completely devoid of her carefully rehearsed persona. The smile, the charm, the curated perfection, all gone. She had nothing left to perform. She had nothing left to reclaim. The business contacts leaned back in their chairs, silent, eyes wide, witnesses. They had seen exactly what had happened. The entitlement, the arrogance, the assumed control, all undone in the space of a few deliberate sentences. And they understood. Ruth's sharp gaze met mine. No words were necessary. She had seen it all, and she knew the significance. Every detail of Andrew's failure, every fragment of Wendy's exposure, recorded in memory, already circulating, already irrevocable. I did not waver. I did not flinch. I held the Italian bag in my hand, the symbol of my agency, my authority, my autonomy. I held it with a weight heavier than any confrontation, heavier than any accusation. It was mine. Every line, every boundary, every word of that declaration was mine. Andrew's mouth opened again, a faint, desperate sound, but it was empty. There were no words that could undo this. No explanations, no justifications, no charm, no influence. The room watched, silent, filled with the echo of my authority, the gravity of my truth. I stood there, calm, deliberate, victorious, while Andrew remained frozen, hand outstretched, grasping at air, grasping at a past that no longer existed. Wendy was pale, unsteady, stripped of her illusions. Ruth was a silent witness, recording every detail. The business contacts understood what had just happened and how irreversible it was. The silence stretched. The storm outside had long passed, but the storm I had unleashed remained, suspended in the air like electricity, tangible and undeniable. This was it. This was the final word, the ultimate assertion of control. The moment where all the power shifted entirely. Andrew and Wendy had no defense, no script, no audience that would believe them now. The room would remember. The town would remember. And I would remain steady, holding my own, unshaken and victorious. I did not smile triumphantly. I did not exult. I simply stood there, calm, unwavering, aware. This was the culmination of patience, calculation, and restraint. Every step I had taken, every document I had prepared, every witness I had enlisted, had led to this precise moment. Andrew's hand slowly dropped. Wendy didn't move. Silence filled the room. The weight of the moment pressed into every shoulder, every gaze, every heartbeat. I was done. The confrontation had ended. The assertion of authority, the reclamation of my life, my name, my property, had been made crystal clear. There was no next step, no reconciliation, no walkbacks, no excuses. I adjusted the bag in my hand, the leather smooth, tangible, mine. I breathed slowly, deliberately, feeling the stillness in the room, feeling the power in my body, the calm in my mind. Victory was complete, absolute, and I stood there, steady, in control, holding what was mine, while Andrew and Wendy stood exposed, their arrogance dismantled, their entitlement revealed, their power gone. The room watched, silent, and that was all that mattered. No after, no epilogue, no reflections, no week later, no month later. Just this, the climax, the final assertion, the undeniable, complete reclamation of everything I had a right to hold. And it ended there.